Welcome to American Conversations and to the Avalon Theater. I am Carolyn Ewing, one of the co-founders of American Conversations, along with Christine Dolan and Trudy Hamilton. This is our 10th American Conversation, the 5th in Easton. We are so pleased you are here, and I think our turnout is a tribute to those who had the vision to turn Talbot County purple. So thank you. At this time, I would like to invite the Reverend Roland Brown to come up and deliver our invocation.
Let's bow our heads. Our God and our Father, Creator, Giver, Sustainer of life, we come this hour to say thank you. Thank you for being our God, watching over us all the day long. Thank you for protecting us from dangers seen and unseen, and then allowing us traveling mercies that we may enter into this place, to have a conversation, to talk to one another. Lord, we pray that your will be done, that you would bless all of those who are participating and those who are here to ask and get answered questions that are on their minds. Knowing, oh God, that your desire is that we would love one another, believe in one another. We pray now, Lord, that you would continue to bless us, not just us, but these United States, this state of Maryland, this county, these counties, and yet even the city of Easton. We pray, oh God, that you would bless the leadership of this country. Change hearts, change minds. Let your spirit dwell mightily in our presence, oh God. We thank you for every family represented here, every group, oh God, that has a concern and desires to know where we are going. We pray for every faith community, but we realize, oh God, that you are God of all of us, and so your will is our will. Let thy will be done. Bless this gathering in the precious name of my Lord and Savior and our soon coming King, Jesus the Christ. And together we say amen.
As we all know, there is no single answer to stopping drug abuse. That is why this conversation is so important, and your presence here is so important. The problem is complex, multifaceted, and unfortunately entrenched. But we also share a responsibility and the possibility of helping people avoid drug abuse and to help those who have become addicted recover. Tonight, our panel and you will explore paths to prevention and recovery. We will begin with our panel discussing the opioid epidemic, then open the floor to Q&A. We want to hear your comments, your questions, your ideas. I would like to invite Sheriff Joe Gamble, his wife Mary, and Lucy Hughes to the stage, please. I have a very special letter to read, and I will try to do it without tearing up, though no promises. Greetings to each of you gathered at the American Conversations panel discussion, Talbot Goes Purple and Beyond. Since 2014, American Conversations has promoted dialogue on issues of local importance for families and communities across our nation. And today, thanks in no small part to Sheriff Joe Gamble's initiative, you have come together to explore strategies to help young people stand up against heroin, other opioids, and indeed harmful drugs of all kinds. Talbot Goes Purple and the collaboration between the Talbot County Sheriff's Office, Tidewater Rotary, and Talbot County Public Schools is community partnership at its best. President Trump and I are heartened by the leadership of Sheriff Joe Gamble and many others in Talbot County, especially students who are very publicly saying no to drugs. Your dedication to fighting this terrible epidemic that ruins lives and rips family apart is inspiring. I am confident that working together, we can put our country on the road to recovery from opioid abuse and find lasting solutions to build a brighter future for America. Thank you for fostering public engagement on this vital issue. You have my best wishes for a successful event and results that will save lives. Sincerely, Michael R. Pence, Vice President, United States of America. It's quite a tribute to our community. We are a special community, I think. Before we welcome Christine Dolan, our moderator, to the stage to introduce the panel, we have a montage of photos that capture the support and the commitment the community has demonstrated for turning the tide on drug abuse. It is a heartwarming beginning to our journey of hope.
Congratulations, Talbot County. You did it. I'm Christine Dolan. As Carolyn said, I'm one of the co-founders with Carolyn and Trudy for American Conversations. And last January, when Joe Gamble asked me to attend a meeting, at that time, I was asking questions that only a journalist would ask. So, how are you going to do it? What are the goals? What are the end goals? What are the measurements? And I sat back, and we first talked about doing this conversation in August. And I realized that we were instead of being part of the lead up to Chris Herron coming to Easton, we needed to come in on the tail end to bring people together, because a lot of people would say, so what's next? When we do these American Conversations, I like for people to sit back and to really relax and reflect and be honest. And when we're broadcasting for later, when we put it on the air, keep this in mind. For an issue like this, you have to really reflect and speak from the heart. None of us have all the answers, but this is one of the American Conversations that was the hardest to figure out how to design this, because everybody has an opinion. Not everybody has experience, but everybody has an opinion coming from their own experience. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce our panel. First, I'd like to introduce my friend Kim Hopkins, who is the executive director of Talbot Special Riders, who has incorporated a retreat that we did in 2014 into an expansive and ongoing equine and arts program for children who are victims of child abuse and also trafficked victims. Kim? Lynn Sanchez, who many of you know. Lynn is an expert on early childhood development, and her added value to this is how she has seen through the years the questions and the issues changing with childhood development. Lynn? My good friend Joanne Muller, who is a chaplain. Joanne educated me in 2014 when she talked a warden in Philadelphia to get me into a prison. Joanne was mentoring as a chaplain and running Bible studies in the Philadelphia Women's Detention Center. 900 women and probably, I think it's 700 beds. I arrived, and we only had 2 hours, and so I was telling the women that I needed to find some questions. I had this theory covering human trafficking for the last 18 years that, in fact, we don't pay attention to child abuse, child rape. The statistics are there in our society. They're all across the globe. Doesn't matter whether you're a Western or Southeastern Asian country. We know that 1 in 5 girls and 1 in 6 boys in America are raped under the age of 18. So I kept on thinking, as a journalist covering this, that these women would be a valuable piece of information. And when I went into the prison, I asked them all, how many have you been raped? All their hands went up. I said, how many of you 10 years of age and younger? 75% of the hands stayed up. I said, how many of you 4 and 5 years of age? And that's when the stories and the conversations started to open. And if any of you have spent any time in a prison, one of the things to protect themselves in the prison is they don't share their stories because they, in fact, don't want to have it used against them in prison, blackmailing them. And we started a conversation in prison, and that's what gave me the idea in 2014 during the summer that we could create American Conversations if we create a safe space so that everybody knows that they're not alone. So that's what we're trying to do. So Joanne, please come up here. And I also want to say that Joanne is one of the few people I know who has actually run a home for women who have been on the street. She did it in Philadelphia. And she has people who graduate from college. She ran it for about 10 years. And the man of the hour, Joe Gamble, who needs no introduction. I think it goes without saying that we're all grateful to Joe Gamble. But I said to him, if in fact we can do this in Talbot County, that this could be a template for taking it other places. So I personally want to say thank you to Mary, who gave him up to us in the community for all those long hours, and to Lucy Hughes for being a partner with Joe to get this off the ground with Tidewater Rotary. Kudos to all of you. So the question I guess we all need to know, Joe, it's a real simple one. Where do you see us going, and where do you want to go, and what do you need from us in the future?
Well, I've told several people that I feel that we've just kicked off. And, you know, I've coached a lot of kids in sports, so I'm a sports guy, so I relate to sports. But, I mean, September was a kickoff. We're just starting. I feel we're in the ring, and we're just starting to swing, and it's going to be a long fight. And we're going to have to keep getting our messages out. We're going to keep going.
How hard was it to sell prevention to the community?
Prevention is the toughest sell. You know, I was kind of amazed when I first became sheriff. You know, many of you know that I ran on a platform of that, you know, we needed to make some changes here in Talbot County. And, you know, I knew that prevention and education was key, because we're not going to arrest our way out of this. We're not going to treat our way out of this as far as, you know, with people that aren't addicted yet. We needed to educate, and people would have events, you know, to say, hey, the sheriff's coming to the town of Oxford at the fire hall. And it wouldn't be well attended. There would be 8 or 10 people. So I quickly learned over that first couple of months as sheriff that, and I didn't do any of this in my last job, you know, with the state police. I was a homicide commander for the state police statewide. So I worked on murders and police-involved shootings. I didn't speak publicly. I spoke in the courtrum.
You did a good job, though.
So anyway, long story short was we started trying to figure out, and Lucy and I and the members of the team, we said, let's go to where the people are. Let's go to where parents go. Let's go to where grandparents go. They go to existing things. We got to go meet them there. We got to meet them at the sports fields, the practice fields, the schools, because parents and grandparents go to those things, and let's design a program around meeting people where they are, because most people don't ever believe that their kids are going to be impacted with this, so they don't take time out of their schedules to learn. Plus, parents are just busy. Mary and I raised 4 kids, and she did a lot of the raising since I was doing a lot of the work and outside the home. You know, it's tough. It's tough on parents to get out. So we're going to take that. We're going to keep taking the message.
Lynn, you lived here for a long period of time.
I have, 37 years.
37 years, all right. So when you take a look at the children in this community, have the challenges changed over a period of time?
Oh, absolutely. I think there's a much bigger sort of toll on the emotional health of children by society in general, and I think on all of us. And I think one of the things that sticks out for me is that a lot of addictions, a piece of the puzzle in many cases, are unmet mental health needs. And those unmet needs begin in childhood, and certainly not, it's one piece of the puzzle. But there's a lot of competition for the hearts and spirits of children. Children feel very connected to 900 people electronically, but have problems connecting or finding someone to connect with that sits beside them, that really looks them in the eye and really gets it. And so I've seen that whole assault. And if you turn the news on, everything is an alert and a warning and serious. And that just constant feeling of angst and alertness. And it cites fear in children. And that really does slow down the emotional development of children and adults, too.
And so when you guys, and because you've dealt with children in terms of the lacrosse teams here, okay, and you've done it for what, 12 seasons? 13 seasons?
Yeah, at the high school, but I coached all types of youth sports for 10 years before that. So for 20 years I've been coaching in the community. Okay, so let's talk about, have the children changed? Have you seen the children changing as well in the community, Joe? Yes, I mean, I do. I think, you know, a lot of people, we have helicopter parents, and Chris Herron put it well, and it really struck a chord with me when he said it. He said, we have helicopter parents in our communities now that go, and we were guilty of it. We took our kids to travel this and travel that, to get recruited to go to college, to get, for lacrosse scholarships or whatever other sports we have. But we don't helicopter on Friday and Saturday night. We helicopter over their grades and their SAT scores and get them tutors for this and tutors of that. But come Friday and Saturday night on their social life, we don't helicopter over them.
Which is what Herron said at the high school.
And I think that the change in parents has somewhat changed the kids. I mean, I think with the breakup of the family and the deterioration of the family and the mental health issues that are going unaddressed, when I was in my state police career, a third of the people that we shot, that we investigated police-involved shootings all over the state, a third of the people we shot were mental health patients that we had no idea that were, because we're not, as a society, treating mental health. And mental health and addiction are so intertwined. I mean, it's just so intertwined.
One of the things Chris Herron said, for those of you that were not at the event, and I thought it was very poignant in this time in history in our country, why aren't we focusing on wellness within schools, teaching kids how to be well, how to live life, how to not be disappointed, how to cope with disappointment, because disappointment is all part of life. And we all know that. But somehow we've raised generations of children now, maybe the second generation, where everybody's first in the class. And so they don't know what it means when you have disappointment and learning how to cope with it. Kim, let me bring you in on this, because you've worked with disabled children in the equine programs and the arts.
That's correct.
Now you're working as an expanded full program with trafficked kids, boys and girls, minors, okay? These are people who live in your community on the Eastern Shore. If you think trafficking doesn't happen here, child abuse doesn't happen, incest doesn't happen, the statistics are there. There's about, I think it's 1,100 or 1,000 kids that have gone through the Child Advocacy Center here. Not all of them have been sexually abused, but they've been neglected. So we know that this exists. Nobody wants to talk about it. But talk to us about what you see at the Special Riders with these kids. And I just want to acknowledge Sandy King, who's in our audience. Sandy's one of the co-founders of the Special Riders going back 38 years, 36 years. And Kim is our new executive director who runs it now, so at her farm. So Kim, talk what you see when the kids get healed going through these type of programs.
Oh, it's like night and day. The first day the kids will come to the farm, they're on alert, as Lynn had said, to reflect on what Lynn had said. They're constantly waiting for something bad to happen, because it's happened to them many times over and over and over again. So they're very, very hyper vigilant. They do not want to trust anyone. But once they get to the farm, we give them a tour of the farm. They get to pet the horses. There's nothing more healing than getting their hands on the horses and having the horse bond with them and smell the horse and just give the horse a kiss. That's the first thing that you can see these kids start to finally relax. Horses also are completely non-judgmental, so they can go to those horses and they can whisper anything to those horses, and those horses are not going to judge them. They are just going to love them. So we see so much of the healing almost immediately. We see a lot of it when the very first day, when the very first session is over, those kids leave beaming and they don't want to leave. It's just a wonderful healing feeling for those kids. And each time they come back, they become stronger, more confident. Our program is focused around empowering these kids, all while we're teaching them life skills that those possible broken families may not have given them. And we know getting them those life skills may help break that cycle, this multi-generational cycle of addictions.
And Kim also grew up in Talbot County. Her family is originally from Tillman, generations, even though the farm itself is in Caroline County. Talk about the arts and the expression and the games that we set up. Especially, I remember last Christmas when we had the retreat there. It was interesting to see the kids play the games.
We had a wonderful Christmas camp for the kids one day. A lot of the kids had physical and emotional disabilities. And again, we saw the same thing. Some of the kids were too nervous to even get close to the horse. They had caregivers who walked them around the farm. But once they were able to be coaxed up on the mounting ramp to get on the horse, they would tentatively get on. We had one young lady who kept refusing. She was very nervous to get on. The woman behind her, who was also nervous from watching her become very nervous, decided she was going to be the brave one and go up and demonstrate for this other young woman how it's okay to get on the horse. So not only did that woman overcome her fears, but she also supported someone else who really needed that. So those are the magical moments that we see.
Joanne, life skills. Kim just brought them up. When you have, tell us all about the importance and the teaching some people who are addicts or who have been in jail, the importance of life skills inside the jail, outside the jail, and what you've learned that is a success story for some of the women that you have helped.
One of the basic lessons that I learned in working with this population was there's so many things that we as a society take for granted in raising our own kids. And in some cases, a lot of women, by the time they come to me in a facility, they've been through the system several times. And the stories leading up to that are usually repeated things that happen to them that in some cases are horrific. And so basic things that I learned when I had them come into my house, everybody wants to teach them how to get a job and how to get a GED and go to support classes and do their 12 steps, and these things are all good. But as a mother, I looked at some things and I said, there's some key things that are missing here. Like, they think they're adults, but they think like a 13-year-old, like the whole world is looking at me and why are you staring at me? I'm going to punch your face and stuff. And it's like, that's ridiculous. They think the world revolves around them. And so I said, in my facility, we had to have a current events class. And they fought me on that. Ended up being one of their favorite classes. But what they had to do was once a week, they looked for something local in the newspaper, they looked for something national, and they looked for something international, and they had to give a report on it. And our home had 5 beds, so we had 5 women in it. And so these 5 women would get up, and by the time they're all done, they're learning 15 different stories that are happening on the local level, the national level, and the international level. And after a few weeks of doing this became one of their favorite things because they realized there's so much going on in the world around them they never even realized. When you live on the street and you're living in an addiction and you're living in an institution, the world is shut out from you. Your world just becomes like, what's happening to me right now? And so this was something that opened them up, and they began to look at some stories that they thought were worse than their story. So that was one of the things that we did that was completely different than everybody else. Another thing that we did that was incredibly healing for them that wasn't being done in other homes was we had them on Wednesday. That was a break in the weekday. Their schedule looked like they got up in the morning from 9 to 5. We had a home for them to live in and a program center around the corner. And we did this in the hood. We did this exactly where they were shooting up, prostituting, but we took them off the streets, we brought them in, and in that environment, we were able to turn their lives around. We had an 83% success rate. But anyhow, we brought them in, and at 9 o'clock in the morning, they'd go over to the program center, and they'd stay there till 5 o'clock. They had to learn some discipline. This is something that when you're out on the streets, you get up when you want to. You go get high when you need to, but you don't have a schedule. So how do you go and keep a job if you don't know how to get up at a certain time in the morning and be someplace and stay there till the clock runs out and then go home? And so this was a life skill that was practical that we taught them by saying, no, you're not staying home today. You have to go to work. And their work was they had to go to classes and they had to learn because there was so much brokenness in them. I didn't feel it was right to just say, come from jail, come to my home, and go out and get a job. They were so far removed from being able to do that. And I work with women. So, you know, you're talking about a very complex situation in a lot of cases. They have children. So there was just very practical things that I did that that set us apart and made us different than what we were doing, than what we saw other people doing.
Joe, do we have enough programs in the detention centers here locally and on the Eastern Shore so that when the people who get, because of drugs, get arrested, get thrown into jail, they get recycled out, do we have programs inside so that they can, that help them to kick the habit when they hit the streets again?
Yeah.
From everything you've seen?
I mean, yes, there's programs there. The problem is pretrial. So I arrest you for a burglary for your addiction. And you're breaking into some nice Talbot County home. And if we're lucky as the police, you're held because you're in active addiction. Quite frequently now with the new law that went into effect October 1st is, local sentences have been cut in half. The discrepancy in bail money, before it wasn't how much could Christine afford versus how much you could afford, which are all weigh into whether you're pretrial released. So just say you are incarcerated or you can't make bail and you go into the detention center. There's not many pretrial services for you. I mean, we have drug court or problem-solving court, but because you might bail out in 3 days. Mm-hmm. Or 4 days or 5 days or 6 days. So to put you in a program then, it's really not, it's not really feasible. Now once you're sentenced and you're serving local time, there are good programs. And Talbot County is on the cutting edge of doing some really good, I mean, they're doing some really good stuff. And then there are people that come in. There's pastors here that come into the detention center and have 12-step meetings and support meetings, but yeah, so we have Vivitrol shots and drugs.
Explain the Vivitrol to the audience.
So the incarcerated or after release, we actually can give people that are addicted to opiates Vivitrol that will lessen the desire to want to use, and if they do use opiates particularly, supposedly they won't get that same euphoric feeling that they would get on the opiate. So and you can get a shot, it's good for 30 days. They're very expensive, but while in detention you can get a pill for $1, basically $1 a pill, to help people. So there are programs in there to get people started. The problem is once they get out, we're sending the people back to their same environment. And you've seen this because this woman is legit. I mean, she was on 2020 and Ted Koppel. I mean, what she was doing in Philly was just amazing. I actually watched it on a DVD. But when they get back into the community, where's the support structure? And there's actually a woman in the audience right now who started a women's home here in Easton, started it under the radar and invited the sheriff up to take a look at it. But, I mean, so those support structures, we don't have those support structures, those sober living. We're just starting to see that now in Talbot County. And the problem is there's a sober living house around the corner from you and people complain.
Yeah, that's always a problem.
It's a whole nother issue, but I think that there are the things to get them started, but let's face it, they're not in our detention center that long, so where are the support structures on the outside to help them? And we have churches that are stepping up and doing and filling some of those needs, but really we need sober living, whatever the housing you want to call it, sober living houses or step-down houses, for those people to do exactly what Joanne's saying. Understand how to get up in the morning.
One of the questions.
Understand how to keep a schedule.
One of the questions I have, and I don't understand it, I attended a lecture here locally on Saturday evening, and somebody who's been in recovery for about 20 years, this woman said that she started when she was about 14. So I asked her, is there something that, looking back now with 20 years recovery, is there something that could have saved you from going down that path? And she said, in my home, when I was a child growing up, I never knew that we weren't supposed to drink at 14 years of age or do drugs at 14 years of age. And this woman is now in her late 40s, and I thought to myself, she's looking back now saying that conversation could have saved her going down that lane. And she was talking about, because she is helping other people, that, you know, there is this misunderstanding or ignorance, and I don't understand it. In order to get people off opiates, you might have to put them on additional drugs to get them off. Which Lynn, you may know more about this than I do. I don't fully understand that, but there was something that she said that resonated with me, and that was you can get addicted with just one opiate. And I thought, wow, we don't talk about that because of your genetics, because of your physiology and your components. And I thought to myself, why is this on the street? If it only, because nobody's going to ask anybody, what's your history? What's your genetics? I mean, can you get addicted? I mean, if you know that you're going to be an opiate addict, that should be in, I mean, we in New Zealand are the only country on the planet, only 2 countries on the planet that advertise drugs. And as we all know, when you watch the drug advertisement, they'll say anything that's, you know, well, you just might die, but, you know, you might, we're marketing to you, okay? You might have a stroke, you might have epilepsy, but we're going to still market it to you. And I'm thinking to myself, why is this, and this is coming from the television experience I have had all my life, why is this stuff on the air? Why do we just sit there and say it's okay with all these warnings? And I don't understand it, because I don't think people look at the warnings. I don't think they ask the questions. That they don't challenge their doctors. They don't say, well, okay, this is fine. They don't realize that their doctors haven't had maybe one semester or one class of this, what we would call the pharmacy knowledge, okay? Most medical doctors are not pharmacists. They don't have that expertise. So they're writing prescriptions, and it's like a bad chemistry lab for somebody. What do you find in terms, Lynn, when we talked over the weekend, in terms of what's important for young parents to know now that you see that's so different, that they might have to learn new parenting skills?
Or just, I think, going back to basics. One of my big soapboxes is that children don't need presence. They need our physical and emotional presence. They don't need gifts. The biggest gift we can give a child is to be emotionally and physically present with them in the room. And that's hard to do now, because parents and families are fragmented. As Joe was saying, we take them everywhere. They're involved in things. We want them to find their passion. We want them to find things that help build their self-worth. And in doing that, we are frantic. One of the saddest things that I heard was that we actually have a national night that's advertised in this country, and it's called Eat Together as a Family Night. And it's that simple. I love the commercial where the mother pauses all the electronics at the dinner table. She gets a lot of nasty looks, but suddenly she sits down and looks them in the face. She's present and says, so, how was your day? And so I think it's important that when we're looking at all the things we fill our children up with, we need to look at the toolbox, their emotional maturity toolbox. What are we putting in there? Some of it comes from dealing with frustrations. We learn a lot from defeat. My sons learned more from sitting on the benches in sporting events than they ever did playing on the field, because you spend a lot of time sitting on a bench in life. But you need to talk about it. Children need champions. They don't need problem solvers. They need people who will instill in them the ability to work their way through life. I mean, the whole goal of parenting and discipline and guidance is self-regulation of a child. And that's, you know, it's empowering a child. You know, I'm sorry you're frustrated. How do we deal with this? How do you deal with it? You know, and it's hard because parents have the most amazing passion of wanting to do well by their children. But sometimes we have too many people telling us how to do it. I mean, there's a lot of people that have written a lot of great books on parenting, but nobody's ever written a book about your child. You're doing that together.
And who do you believe is the best expert on of a child?
Oh, the parent. The parent is the expert on the child. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, they don't feel that sometimes. They don't feel, they feel that there's other people and they can look up anything on the internet, so they don't feel that. I know my child. I know my child. They're my child.
So let's talk about the boundaries. The boundaries of what we find in terms of children who were traumatized and acting out. Kim, when the children come to you, and Joanne, you run into your clients. Mm-hmm. How much boundaries are there before the healing gets started? Because I think we need to have that somehow examined in terms of what we do next in Talbot County to help people really heal. Because the one thing that I've seen since I've come out here 5 years ago, when I did ask one of the local officials what was going on with the heroin and the opiate issue, one of the local elected officials looked at me as if I had endorsed Hitler. Didn't want to acknowledge it because it might hurt the tourism out here. Then Joe ran, and he confronted it as somebody who lives here locally for a long period of time. So I want to acknowledge the growth that's come in terms of the conversations, but I think that we need to examine some of the programs that are out here, because if we had programs that really would work, I'm not saying that there aren't going to be relapses with those who are in recovery. We all know that that's true, but at the same time, I'm wondering if we can up the game, and for those who are in recovery who are here, when we open it up for Q&A, please let us know how you view this, because I think that we should be able to up the recovery programs here. I'm not a recovery expert in terms of the programs, but I think that there's a conversation that's been elevated here that we can take further if we get some feedback on what's really needed. So Kim and Joanne, when do you want to jump in here?
Well, our program, which is a program that I have tweaked, is called Catch Riders. It's creating a therapeutic change through horsemanship. And basically, it's a program that works with survivors of trauma across the board, whether it's someone who's dealing with addiction, a family who's dealing with addiction, children who have been abused, women who have been battered, because trauma is trauma. A child who's been homeless, a child who has not had enough to eat. Trauma is trauma across the board. And what I love about our program is its three elements. They do a ground element to the program where they are working through little activities that we're incorporating those life skills that they're working with the horses. We usually pair them up, so there are 2 team members at least, so they also are learning how to build appropriate relationships, building teamwork. They're earning trust. They're learning how to trust again. A lot of times through the horse. Sometimes it's through their team members. Sometimes it's through a volunteer who is there to help them. But we do the unmounted piece, the groundwork that teaches them a little bit of an activity. We then go to a riding portion, because that was one of the elements I wanted to add, because the kids would come to the farm, pet the horses, do the activities, and then they would say, but I want to ride. So we wanted them to ride, to feel that horse, to feel the movement, the methodical, rhythmic movement of the horse, which is also healing. So we did that, and again, they worked as a team. One of the members was leading that horse, albeit with the assistance of volunteers as spotters the whole way. But there was a leader who was supporting the rider. The rider at times was having to give information to the leader, so that was communication. So that was a big piece. The third piece is support group. We have a therapist there who is there to basically debrief, talk with the kids after each of the sessions, because once in a while there is a trigger. A kid will have a breakthrough or a meltdown, and that is something that we have that therapist there to work with that child. Or sometimes they just want to talk about how they felt about how things went at the end of the day, how frustrating something may have been, but how they worked through it. So that's what we really like about that program, because it covers many elements.
Joanne?
You know, we talk about programs a lot, but what we found is what was necessary for the population that we worked with was they needed family. And so that's why we separated where they lived from where they went around and did work and did their program. Because at night when they came back, we were a family, and we surrounded them like a family, and we ate together like a family, and we did things that looked like a family. These girls are still, they're not girls, they're women, but these women today are still friendly with one another in the little group that they went through the home with, because they learned something that they didn't have necessarily growing up. And that is, they learned that God is not an angry God looking to punish them, but a loving God waiting to embrace them. And these are things that they learned because it was modeled to them. People reached out and loved them and said, this is unconditional love. This is what it looks like. It doesn't matter what you did. It matters that God loves you, and we're here to demonstrate his love to you. And that was the most powerful piece. I could line up the women, and Christina's met some of them. And the women that came to me was usually the warden would come and say, we don't know what to do with this one. We've tried. She'd been in and out 23 times. Sharon was in and out 13 times. And they're the ones that they sent to me. And I believed that it didn't matter what they had been through, God could change the outcome of their life. And we still, with the worst of the worst and society's throwaways, that's who I got. We had an 83% success rate. It's because of the love. These people just needed to know they're loved. And I think the most powerful tool that we have as a community is to just love them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that, Joanne, because you were the organizer for Talbot Goes Purple with the churches, okay? Tell us, your prayer group is part of my Bible group, my buddies. Good to see you guys, and thanks for praying for us all tonight downstairs before we started. What do you think? I know that it wasn't perfect with the churches. I know that, Joe, you put out letters to 40 churches?
We put out
60? How many churches?
Yes, 62.
Okay.
I think it was. We looked it up in the Chamber of Commerce and sent one to everyone that was listed in the Chamber of Commerce.
Okay, so if Al Silverstein has the right list, there were 62. Okay, so, and then, Joanne, how many responses did you get as a result? Because you were Joe's church coordinator for Talbot Goes Purple.
I think Dale Skinner and I were just looking at that list today, and I think there was 14 churches that were actively participating. There was maybe a few more, maybe 5 or 6 more that were kind of on the fringe and wanted to be a part of it, but didn't know how. And the rest I can't tell you about because they didn't come through us.
Okay, so
and in all fairness to them, some would contact us, for lights and material that I might not have been the best communicator to Joanne. But you did a great job.
Oh yeah, she did. There was the night that Chris Herron was here. There was a group that met in Idlewild Park, and I joined them, and they walked and prayed, and by the time that they got to the high school before the Heron event, they all started singing Amazing Grace. And I have to tell you, I got teary-eyed about that, because, it was just, and we didn't get any pictures of that, unfortunately. I couldn't I think I was trying to get in touch with Tina, because I needed to try to get a picture of that, but I didn't find it any place I could steal it, because I stole most of these pictures when I put that montage together.
She sure did.
All over the place. But the churches, for those who are representing churches here tonight, please, when we get to the Q&A, tell us what you need. Tell us how people reacted inside the churches, because when you see the large group of the kids, that's St. Peter's and Paul, that big, huge crowd that was in the front page of the paper just the other day. I stole that picture from them or somebody. But the children, you can tell from the pictures in the montage, the children are engaged. And they're going to need some support, but they're also going to need to have those conversations with their parents. And if their parents are not there, it's hard. Kitty Nelson said to me, because she's worked with the foster community, and there are kids whose both parents died of addictions, overdoses. So they have not just the addiction as an element in their life. It's nothing. It's a stamp on their life. in terms of coming through that. What do you find with the children who suffer, who are left behind because of addictions?
Well, I think that, as I think Joanne's so eloquently put, it goes back to just that feeling of love, of feeling connected and being part of something, be it a family. Families come in all shapes and sizes. Having an intact family where everybody, do 2.5 children and the dog and the SUV doesn't guarantee that things are going to go well. Right. And so I think that those are you go right back to the basics. I don't know if any of you remembered seeing years ago, they had the 60-minute special on about the woman in New York who had opened a school and took in the building children that were all in special education. They were sort of the throwaways, the ones from schools that were just totally, or homes that were just totally non-existent. And she began every day with her students, when they walked in the door, she said, "You are smart, you are beautiful, you are an important person." And that's how she started her day. And they brought the group back. Now, every one of them had been in special education and were barely hanging on, and every single one of them graduated from college. Every single one of them. And she credited it, the power of the simplest things. One of my favorite mantras is assume nothing. Don't assume that anyone has ever said to any child, and every child should get this from someone, "Hi there, I'm so glad to see you. You're important. You're special."
That validation.
Just that validation of personal human worth is just so important, because as a child progresses and they're finding themselves having anxiety come into their life or depression come into their life, there are ways of coping with it. If they don't have anything that they can pull out and say, "Yeah, but I'm special. I belong to someone. I mean something to someone." That's what we have to start with.
The emotional validation.
And we do, when we do that with adults, like I do that with my deputies, you encourage them. Mm-hmm. And you see the response you get. Even as adults, we suck that up like a sponge.
Do.
And kids, they need that.
They do.
They just need that encouragement. They need that encouragement from strangers. And, we've got some great programs here. And I think you sit on the board for Talbot Mentors, or at least we were in a fundraiser together. But there's opportunities in this county to love on kids. Mm-hmm. And we need, as a community, and to take advantage of, we have Character Counts, we have Talbot Mentors, your program that you're doing with the special riders, and there's opportunities for us to serve. There's opportunities to reach that generation that doesn't have dinner with their family, doesn't have a family that's anything close to what anything normal looks like. That, I said just yesterday, I spent some time with a young man and his family, and one of his relatives called me and said that he thought he was starting to struggle with drugs. I'm like, well, I'll go over to his house, and I didn't know these folks. I went over there and sat down with this family and this mom who's young and has 5 children, and she doesn't speak real good English, and there's some just awesome kids there that need somebody to love them. Mm-hmm. Need somebody to encourage them. Need somebody to say, "Hey," and I'm going to hook him up with you, Lucy, at Talbot, at Chesapeake College, to say, "Hey, what is there out there for this young man who just graduated from high school that he can start navigating the system, or he's going to be in the detention center?" Mm-hmm. And if somebody doesn't reach them and grab them, they're going to be in the detention center. If we don't love them, and our churches are just so capable, and I think there's so much potential here. Joanne really did a great job. And, Joanne sends me emails. And she sent me one yesterday that was so encouraging that I was like, it gave me new energy again. And I'm 53 years old, I shouldn't need encouragement. Yeah. But
sure, we all do.
We
all do.
We need that. Imagine these kids in our community that are just hurting because nobody's there to encourage them. Nobody's ever encouraged them. And they don't even have a clue what their next step in life is going to be.
And I think we need to include all children, though, because sometimes we assume, if we see families that look fully functional, we think, oh, phew, they've got their act together. We don't have to worry about that group. Yeah. those are the groups I worry about the most.
Wow.
The ones that
The
pretend
ones,
to be.
I mean, the ones that are visibly struggling are the ones that of course will be the most, need the most attention. But I worry as much about the family that is doing everything right, because there are no guarantees. And those families, those parents need validation. We can't assume that they think they're doing a good job of parenting just because everything looks good. And they need as much validation that they're the expert on their child. And good for you. And I'm one of these crazy people in stores that just walk up to parents and congratulate them for having their child in the store with them and talking to their child. I just want to, when I go restaurants, yeah. Because I would have killed for someone to have done that to me. I mean, I needed it as a parent who had read a lot of books, and I needed somebody. I didn't feel it. Just because it's there doesn't mean you feel it. So it starts with adults and works down to children.
Sure, sure. Okay, so I'm going to give you all about 5 minutes to the microphones over here. But for camera positioning, what I want you to do is I want you to walk around to the far end and come up here. And we're going to take comments. I want to open up that we don't just stay upstream on the conversation tonight, that we actually go downstream as well, because part of my vision is hopefully, and we can't do it if you're high on opiates, but Joe, through Chris Herron, has educated me you can play basketball high on heroin, which I didn't know. I thought people fell asleep on heroin. So that was kind of a learning curve for me. But my vision is for people who are in recovery that we know that they're in recovery, is that we can get them in Kim's program. Now that's a big feat. That's an uphill battle, because you can't have somebody who's high on drugs around a horse. It's just not a good idea. But I'm hoping that we can do that, or if Joanne opens up a home here for some women, that we can get some people, and some of the women that are in the homes here, and the men too. If we can get them into the bonding, because the one thing we know when people are traumatized is their self-worth plummets. It just plummets. And it's an uphill battle to get them to feel again, but then to feel good about themselves, because a lot of people who have been through trauma don't just think that they feel bad, they think that they are bad. And sometimes when they're going through recovery and they fall off the recovery trail, they think that they're bad for failing, as opposed to realizing that they can cope and keep going. And sometimes and we've talked about this privately, about the stigma that society puts on some of these folks. And it's not right, because you could put a stigma on every single one of us in society for whatever we think that we are not accomplishing in life. So the stigma of the other has got to be dropped down, because we're all guilty of that. Anything anybody up here wants to say before we get to the Q&A? Because I want you to participate in the Q&A as well, in the comments that we'll get from the audience. Anybody? Joanne?
Well, I would like to say that I was just with, I think he's still here, Reverend Brown this afternoon, and we were talking about where do we go from here, because we didn't mobilize ourselves just so that we can say, okay, let's go back to what we were doing. But there's a whole movement, and we can feel the shifting. We're very grateful to Joe for this work that he's done, because it has really helped us find a place where we can come together to the table so that we can start partnering and we can network our resources, and we can look at our county with a countywide perspective instead of individual churches doing individual things. And what does that look like when we address our community as a whole, instead of, I just say, like swatting flies, everybody's doing their own little thing and we're not accomplishing anything. But if we pull our resources together, what will that look like? And we have 30 people who are meeting together that came out of mobilizing the churches. Some are pastors, some are just regular people, some are people that are running programs, but we've come together and we're meeting on a regular basis, and we're coming up with a plan. We're coming up with a plan that's going to change the way we do business in Talbot County as churches, and it's exciting. And I won't tell anybody until I tell Joe first. So.
Another email, that's right.
Yeah, I called Joanne, and Joanne walked into my office and said, hey, I've moved down here to the Eastern Shore, and this is before Talbot Goes Purple, and here's my card, and if I ever can do anything. And then, I got in touch with Joanne when we were just starting the planning of this, and those people in your life that you say, hey, I need help here, and they take it and run with it and keep you updated and don't pester you and don't bother you, but just charge straight ahead and do way more than you ever expected. That's Joanne Muller. And I can't thank you enough because you're doing great things for us.
So let's open it up to Q&A. And comments too. So the microphone's over here, and if you can just walk on the outside. And we're going to have to turn the lights on. Lights will come up a little bit for this. But please, just speak clearly and introduce yourself so we kind of know who you are and why you're here.
Is this on?
Is
it on? Yes.
Yes, it is.
Hi, I'm Holly Wright. I live in St. Michael's.
Hi.
And I know we have some great people working on this problem in Talbot County, and they've really identified some problems that need to be addressed. And I'm wondering whether Talbot Goes Purple is going to address those problems. Are we going to go, or is Talbot County Goes Purple going to go beyond prevention? And really, do we have the will to address these problems? Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. So let me just kind of address the Talbot Goes Purple part of it. When we started this, the reason we started this program was, I was giving talks to small groups in the county, and I realized that parents didn't understand the path to addiction. They had no clue that, so if I gave a survey, and those of you who heard my talk, I say, raise your hand if you talk to your kids about drinking and driving, and every hand in the room goes up because we understand that as parents and grandparents. Same with texting and driving and seatbelt use. What parents weren't understanding was the connection between prescription drugs and heroin. Our kids in Talbot County aren't going from marijuana to heroin. It's the prescription drugs. And when those slides that you saw earlier, 4 out of 5 kids that get addicted to heroin started with prescription drugs, 80%, and 80% of those kids got them out of our own medicine cabinets. So, we talk about legalization of drugs. Would that help society? Well, we've done that. We've legalized opiates in our society, and we've got the worst drug epidemic in our history. So I think your question is, and I'm not trying to avoid the question because I'm circling around back to it, was Talbot Goes Purple was an awareness and educational campaign that we need to continue with the awareness and education. I think some of the education and awareness that's come out of that is people are now asking questions about recovery and treatment. So I sit on two other committees, the LDAC, which our county has, the local Drug and Alcohol Council, that we're talking about these. And then we just formed, because of the governor's money, we got $79,000. And we just decided on, we just got that money and determined what we were going to do with that money. So in the meeting, when we were talking about what we were going to do with that money, I said, well, listen, the great citizens of Talbot County have paid for a great awareness program, so we don't have to spend any of that money on prevention and education, because we're going to continue with donors to continue to educate with that, so we don't have to spend. So we got about $79,500. So what we've determined for that was that we're going to purchase care for the uninsured, addiction care, and supplemental recovery beds and initial housing assistance costs. So we have money earmarked and assist recovery houses. So we have money earmarked to try to address some of those needs in the recovery community. I'm not a specialist in recovery, and I've never claimed to be, but I think for me the first step was, and like I said, we're just starting this. Talbot Goes Purple is never going to be the whole answer. It's never going to be the answer for all of our community's needs, but I think it started the conversation, which was the goal. Let's start the conversation. And where do we go from here? Now we have our churches are mobilized. We're now meeting and talking regularly with all the disciplines, government disciplines in Talbot County, try to address this. We know where the shortfalls are. The health department knows where the shortfalls are and the gaps are. And working with Bonnie, who's in the audience, who has a women's recovery house here in Easton, we're understanding better because we're now communicating. And I think the best thing about Talbot Goes Purple was that we started talking to each other. You know, it's starting to come down from the governor's office. It's going to be coming down from the feds soon. You know, I got a grant for a heroin coordinator at our office that's tracking every non-fatal overdose and fatal overdose in the county, and then we're linking them with services with the health department. So, boy, 3 years ago when I took over, I was like, nobody was talking to anybody. It's not because of me, it's just because it's all coming to a head now, and I think the purple part, point well taken, but
there's
working
also,
on that.
You have to understand, this Purple Club, when Heron first started speaking, and I forget what year it was in, he was doing lectures, and then he went to a lecture, and there were some kids sitting in the front row who had purple t-shirts on. And the child stood up and said to Chris Heron, "Thank you very much for validating who we are." And he said, "Well, what do these purple t-shirts represent?" And she said to him that they represent that we don't do drugs or alcohol. And the larger community of children started to snicker. And Chris said, no, hang on. So out of his experience in setting up his lecture series across the country, he also created the Project Purple clubs. What's different this time around also is that one of Joanne's sons, who's a principal in Philadelphia, invited Chris to come several years ago, before the Purple Clubs were there. So what we're seeing now is an evolution, and there's a growth, there's a maturation in terms of even Chris Heron's work, because what Joe did here in Talbot County was to bring Chris in, but as a result, decide to turn the county purple, set up clubs that are now in the high schools with the Project Purple. And then why don't you share, Joe, what some people were talking about beyond Talbot County?
So Lucy Hughes from Tidewater Rotary and I have been in contact with a number of counties across the shore. We went and met with Wycomico, Kent counties. We've gotten calls out of state. So we're in the process of writing a template for kind of how we did it. How did we grab all the different folks in the community, engage the churches, engage the homeowners. We had a homeowners association. We reached out to them, the schools, all the governments, the different governments, you know, the town governments, you know, how we reached out to those and brought everybody, try to bring people together. And, you know, in such a divided country right now where things are really divided and people are so polarized, I mean, it was just refreshing to see people that are left and right, Democrats and Republicans, Jews and Gentiles, and you know, non-believers, and you know, I mean, really, our community, white, black, our community really embraced this in a way that I was shocked. I'll be honest with you, I was shocked. But I think that, you know, going forward, we need to change the culture in our high schools. We need to change this culture of parents. You know, we still have parents that have parties for kids. They buy alcohol to give them a safe place. I want to provide my kids a safe place. Well, let me tell you something, folks. 10% of kids have an addiction card in their back pocket. And what I mean by that is society, we've done all the studies, 10% of our society is predisposed to addiction. So we just busted one of a good, I'm sure good intended people. Where we had 14-year-olds when my deputies pulled up running through the woods drunk, smoking weed behind the house because it's a safe place for kids to party. That was the attitude that we had in 1982 when I got to high school, right? That was but we didn't understand the development of the brain. We didn't understand that the earlier you start drinking, the earlier you use a substance, the more likely you're going to become addicted. We didn't understand that kids are predisposed through family trauma, life issues, and just heredity. So 10% of the kids that walk into your house to drink that beer that you just bought them are predisposed to addiction. So if you have 50 kids at your house, 5 kids, you've just started them on their path to addiction. We need to change how we think as a culture. You know, I attended a party because I was coaching at the high school. It was a lacrosse end of the season party for high school kids. And I pulled up, and I'm sure my lovely bride was with me, and we go in the backyard, and it was a beautiful waterfront estate. The parents were there, kids were there, and I was going to give out trophies to the kids with the other coach, and they were serving wine to the parents. Well, why do we need to serve alcohol at a kid's high school sporting event? We need to change the way we think as a society, and what message are we sending our kids? I'm not saying there's anything wrong with wine, but it doesn't have a place at a high school event for little girls, because we're modeling that. And so, anyway, I don't know how I got off on that tangent.
No, but that goes back to the conversation about values. Because people think, oh, those were the glory days of old-fashioned values and things like that. But at the same time, we've normalized.
Right. But
even though we know more knowledge now than we did 25 years ago, 35, 40 years ago, or even more years ago when we were all teenagers.
Right, and the purple, I really don't, purple, I mean, I think it's a kind of a cute color, but I'm not into colors. This purple stuff has gotten us in the doors that we wouldn't have gotten into. To talk to people and address people that we wouldn't have been able to talk to. People that wanted to have their ears open, wanted to come to an event. And, we were in ball fields, we were at churches. I was in Reverend Brown's church Sunday worshiping with his congregation. And the congregation went purple, and he delivered an awesome message. I mean, I don't know, he did. He delivered an awesome message. And about, loving one another, recovery, challenging one another, and challenging the congregation. And I think that we've just started, but if we can continue this momentum, and then we're gonna be able to get to those things, and people are gonna start to feel like, yeah, maybe it's not a good idea to have that party. Maybe it's a good idea for me to get involved with Talbot Mentors or your group to engage young people because this is a hurting community. Let me tell you, it's beautiful on the outside, and there's great people. And I tell people all the time this: if we can't do it in Talbot County, Maryland, it can't be done. That's right. Mm-hmm. It just can't be done. Mm-hmm. So, I just encourage you. Sorry, Christine, I'll go off all night.
Kitty, or who's next?
My name is Dr. Scribner. I'm a psychiatrist in town. So I'm one of that medical community that's giving out those evil drugs. And I am so grateful because I think we're reaching a tipping point and the momentum is huge. There are not enough providers. It's not a matter of just money. There's just not enough of us. Mm-hmm. But this is making our job so much easier because when I try to help someone taper down off of something.
Speaking to the mic.
When I try to help someone taper down off of something, they now have the education, they have the culture. When somebody hears that somebody's doing a party and they're supplying alcohol to kids, now there's this whole huge context of, are you kidding me? Have you looked at Chris Herron on YouTube? Have you listened to that? And it's not just Talbot, because all the providers that work in Talbot work everywhere else because we're all spread so thin. And all the churches have community members that come from other counties. I just can't tell you how much optimism we should have right now. And I really like this idea of let's bring with the problems, but let's also realize nobody here is at fault. Everybody here is coming from the best of themselves. Mm-hmm. And I really like the message that there, but by the grace of God, go I.
Amen. Absolutely. Amen. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you.
I think I'd also like to, sort of invite us to stop thinking about the addict. And start thinking about a person with an addiction in their life. They're a person first that has an addiction. But sometimes we just throw that term out, and I'm as guilty as anyone, But no one.
The label.
No one. Label. Well, but we all sort of have a vision in our mind of what that looks like or what it could look like. But we really need to remember that they need to remember that they're a person first. So they're a person with an addiction. And it's just, for me, and just that little bit of a mind shift really helps me to really encourage that person to focus in on the fact that they're a person first. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Kitty?
Kitty Nelson, Eastern Shore native.
Speaking to the mic.
There we go. Is that better?
Yeah.
And Lynn, I really appreciate you saying that because it's not only a person with an addiction, but it's a person with an illness that often, especially with the opioids, start with a pain They didn't even know they had that addiction gene in them. As Dr. Scribner said, I see Talbot Goes Purple as the tipping point, the message, the ad that's getting out there to start the conversation. And the conversation also needs to go beyond the adults in this room, but to the children. I can't tell you, and not to breach any confidentiality, but the children that we see who want their parents to get better. They want to be able to connect with their family. They want to have that family dinner, not just on Christmas Day or Thanksgiving Day. They want to have it all the time. Thank heavens the churches have provided some of that consistent group, that is my family, that is my safe spot, to have that discussion. But people need to be able to be more open-minded as to what that means and what that looks like. And I can tell you, even the stigma that social services deals with as to why haven't you taken that child away from that family? That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to keep families together. And I'll tell you, there isn't a kid that comes into foster care that says, I want to stay in foster care. They want to be back home. And that's our job, is to try to get kids back to their families, some sort, some way, somehow, and try to help this disease. It's going to take a lot of conversation. It's going to take a lot of options for rehabilitation. And each person, addictions has changed. This is a whole new game. I wish Bill was here to be able to tell us how to do this one. Because a lot of people are saying, and I don't mean this to offend anybody, but give me a good old alcoholic any day, because this opioids, it's changing the brain. It's changing the way people used to think. And an addict will tell you with this disease, I don't know how I got here. It's extremely painful. It takes over a whole different control. And it's going to be a long-term problem to keep discussing, keep reevaluating, and see what we need to fill the voids.
Thank you, Kitty. Let me ask you something. From your perspective, again, without going into confidentiality, what is it from your experience now that you're hearing that is needed, the void? What's the void from your personal, professional experience?
It just changes with each situation. It really does. I can't just give you one label of what it is. So many things have resonated with what everybody has said. It's having a safe place. It's feeling valued. It's feeling listened to. The solutions that we have fit some people and don't fit everybody. I can't pinpoint it. I wish I could. I wish I had that. That's why I think that this is the tipping point of keeping that conversation going. It really changes. You get, 1 minute you've got Valium, next minute you've got opioid, I can't even say it tonight, opioids. Then you've got fentanyl. Then you've got something else mixed with something else. And the next thing you know, somebody that you had in rehab that was clean for 2 months took a dive, got a bad batch, and they're dead. They're gone. And we're dealing with those kids. The amount of substance-exposed newborns, and I'm not saying just in Talbot County, I'm going to say here on the Eastern Shore. There are numbers out there that can tell you, and the nurses on the units can tell you what they are dealing with and how they are trying to educate women when they come in as to how to deal and work with their addiction and their children. It was interesting what you said, Reverend, about getting them to think about local news, national news, international news, because when we are talking to families, we try to get them to focus on the needs of the child. We know they have needs, but this needs to be about your child right now. What do they need? They need, somebody they can rely on. They need food. They need a routine. They need a bath. They need to go to bed. They need to go to school. How do we help get them in that routine? And our parents are so sick, they can't even operate that way. They can't even think that way. So we've got a lot of work to do. And it's just so many different things that we've still got to work on.
Have you seen the roller coaster really get out of control in the last 10 years, 5 years out here on the Eastern Shore?
Big time. I mean, when you think about Tillman Island, I can't tell you, and my father took out fishing parties there all his life, and I worked down there as a child. Families that I have known all my life are like my kid was stole from the church. I mean, it broke their hearts. They were stealing, they were taking the copper or whatever they could to get money from the metals. You know, when we heard the story of the child whose body was left on Bosman Road, you know, I can remember getting phone calls from my sons who are a lot older, from other mothers, from saying, what do you know? What have you heard? I said, I don't know what's going on. I mean, that was, you know, less than a mile from my home. That is just frightening. And now it doesn't matter where you turn. You look at the news and you count how many, you know, deaths or arrests there have been. You look at the obituaries and you say, oh my God, that was another one. When you've got no explanation how that person died, it doesn't take a whole lot to figure 2 + 2 = 4 on that one. And we've lost another human being. We've lost a member of our family. We've lost somebody else who was a contributor of society. And I'm talking good people. You know, it is. It's hitting everybody. It's hitting everybody, all walks of life.
I want to give a shout out to the Star Democrat here because, and to Kelly for coordinating a lot of it. But the Star Democrat allowing so many people to bare their souls. Congratulations to the guys and gals over there. Seriously. And God bless those people that have been affected from it, because some of them were just tearjerkers. They were terrific.
We met with David Fike, the CEO, about 5 months before, Lucy, about 5 months before, and asked for 5 front-page articles in September, and he called us back. We had another meeting. He said, I'll give you one every day.
Yeah, because
the
stories are there. The stories are there. Yeah.
Kelly Callahan with Soul Candy Media, who was the only person that we brought on as a paid part-time person to help us, because we were getting overwhelmed. Really did a great job. She did a lot of that articles with one of her friends, and the Star Democrat was very, very gracious. Eastern Utilities was very gracious with us.
Yeah, absolutely. They turned everything purple. I stole a lot of. I didn't have to steal their pictures. They gave me their pictures. Sir, you came up. Yes.
Yes. My name's John Schreiner, and I'm a citizen and a grandfather. And I was the proudest moment of my life was getting my daughter seeking treatment from alcohol and drug abuse 30 years ago, and she's still sober. So that's my personal connection. I want to thank Sheriff Gamble and the panel here for Talbot Goes Purple in spades. And the beyond part is why I stood up. And there's one issue that hasn't been dealt with tonight, and I'm not sure we can fully, but there's a supply part of this whole thing. I'm into prevention. I'm part of the Talbot Partnership for Prevention of Substance Abuse. And I'm looking, part of the prevention is the supply line. And there's a supply line because our government has taken the power away from the DEA. I don't know what you've read recently, but there's nasty things going on there. What can we do as citizens to reinforce the DEA and to reduce the way the supply, and to work with physicians and dispensers of drugs to really limit their use?
Okay, so let me, for those of you that don't know what we're talking about, front page of the Washington Post last Sunday and also on 60 Minutes that night, they did a collaboration that was an extraordinary piece of journalism that it's just noted. Here's the synopsis of the story. It was a DEA whistleblower who said that there were people who were politicians in Washington, lobbyists in Washington, who in fact represented drug companies, worked for politicians on Capitol Hill, swung through the doors from working for the politicians on Capitol Hill and went to work for the drug companies and worked against legislation that empowered the DEA to bust what they call drug distributing companies. These are not small companies. These are in the top Fortune 500 companies and top 50 in the country. And the story was a lead story on 60 Minutes. I texted Joe and said, you got 60 Minutes going? He said, yes. That was also on the front page of the Washington Post. As a result of that story, it made people on Capitol Hill crazy angry, as it should. It exposed the lobbyists for being the hypocrites that they are, because they were actually working to get legislation when they were working for the politicians to support the DEA, but then when they swung out of working for Capitol Hill, they were taking money. It's not any different than what you hear about Backpage and Google. Backpage selling ads that rape kids. Those are what the sex ads are. And Google and the rest of the valley out in California supporting the defense, because what happened is they wanted to, it is the swamp. It is the swamp of Washington in terms of money, campaign financing, and also how lobbying is done. It's not the moral high ground. And so what this gentleman was just talking about is this is a story that people need to know. Now, that is not the entire drug community. I am somebody who's been anti-drugs my entire life because my mother had rheumatoid arthritis. I'm one of these kids who went into the medicine cabinet, but I was 4 years of age because my mother had to take 9 aspirin a day when I was from 3.5 years of age until she died at 80 years of age. And then when I was little, they were red. They looked like M&Ms. So my mother would tell me when she was taking them that she was having candy. And as a 4-year-old, I did that monkey see, monkey do, and snuck into her medicine cabinet, and I started eating the aspirin. That resonated, Joe, with me when you talked about the medicine cabinet. I had to have my, it didn't kill me, I had to have my stomach pumped at the age of 4 years of age. But as a result of my personal history, family history, I saw my mom take a lot of drugs. And when I hear today that kids are going into their parents' medicine cabinet and just mixing it up, and I mean, this is like a cocktail with no prescriptions. There's no warnings on this thing because it's not just one opiate. It's taking the stuff that's in your medicine cabinet and doing it. I mean, the drug companies have over-medicated this society, this country. We have 100 million people in this country on antidepressants. We have publicized the pain management, but we haven't educated people that if you have an operation, if you have a tooth extracted, you're going to feel some pain. It's going to heal, but we have an over-prescription of drugs where you might need 4 or 5, but we put 30 in the prescription. We don't challenge doctors and say, hey, I'm on this drug, and if you mix it with this, what's going to happen? So there's the personal responsibility. There's the corruption of the drugs companies buying people out. There's the Pharmaceutical Manufacturing Association, which is one of the largest, most powerful lobbying associations in this country. And my father made his money off of biomedical manufacturing of drugs for medicinal purposes. But at the same time, for anybody not to read the Washington Post or look at the 60 Minutes piece, you need to take a look at that because there's going to be hearings on that in the very near future. And it's very important in terms of the opiates. It's not the whole devil in this arena, but it's a good part of the politics and the money behind this issue. Because we really have been, in the last 20 years, from putting young kids on Ritalin, letting the schools decide whether or not the kids should be on the drugs. We've created a society that if you're hooked on opiates, you need to get other drugs to get off of opiates. We're not looking downstream to the mental and emotional wellness. We're telling kids you don't have to cope. You're going to be a star, so they don't know how to cope. So they look for the self-medication. We've got parents that forget that if your kids see you do something that they're going to follow in your footsteps, which is pretty much what, 2 or 3 generations ago, people knew. People knew that.
I think to answer some of John's question too is we just need to hold our politicians accountable. And we need to know what they're voting for. What is our congressman and our senator voting for? and hold their feet to the fire and say, what did you vote for this legislation? Did you vote for this, and why? And what's your explanation? There might be two sides to the story, but I get calls every day from people who want to hold my feet to the fire at the sheriff because they're not happy about the speeding going on the road, or they're not happy about the speeding ticket they got on their road because we sent deputies there. And we're all challenged as elected officials, but I think that we're disengaged generally as a society from, okay, we like that guy, he's a good-looking guy, not me. But, so I'm going to vote for him because I know somebody who knows him, says he's a good guy. Well, what did he vote for? What does he stand for? Does he stand for my principles? And you might not agree with me, and my principles, but let's hold these people accountable and let's get new people in there that are going to make a difference. I don't think they're doing anything right now. I guess they're trying to do some stuff, but I'm not seeing any results. So, hey, you got to get a whole new bunch in there. Let's get a whole new bunch in there. I think Bonnie wanted to. Bonnie's one of our champions. She's one of our champions in our community.
Thank you, Joe. Hi, I'm Bonnie Scott. I wear a lot of hats in this community, but I'd say a couple of my favorite ones are I'm a parent, except that my child died from an overdose 5 years ago. And so now I co-parent his child and my other grandchildren. So that's probably my favorite hat. But my next favorite hat is that I am the executive director of the Rising Above Disease Recovery House for Women here in Easton. And just like Joe said earlier, we did open it under the radar because we were terrified of what Talbot County would say, that they would say, not in our backyard, that we don't have an opioid problem in this county, and by putting you guys on Front Street, we're going to have to shut you down. We're going to find a reason to shut you down, so we opened it on the slide. And I checked our bank account yesterday, and we have $4,500. And I don't know what that means to you guys, but I looked at that number and said, I got about 4 more months. Unless I find some more money. Because these women are coming out of jail penniless. They're coming out of shelters penniless. And we find a way to feed them. Churches, St. Vincent de Paul, these organizations that help and help and help, but it's not enough. We need more than 4 more months.
So what you're telling us is you need money for your operation. And how many women do you have living in your house, Bonnie?
Tomorrow, I will have a full house. I take a girl in at 9 a.m., I take a girl in at 1 p.m., and I will have 6 women living in our house, and we'll be full.
So you need to sit down one-on-one with Joanne.
Yes, I do, actually. I said to somebody I could get her number. I said, Kitty, I need her number. I need your number.
You can't. You can meet with Joanne. That would be great. We don't need anybody's permission for that.
Above all, I just want to thank everybody for making these conversations happen, because we have been, we've been a secret for way too long. Addiction runs so deep in my family, and yet recovery currently is running even deeper. My 83-year-old father just got 9 months clean.
Wow. Thank you, Bonnie. Yeah, we've got time for one more because we have a sort of a special surprise for you tonight. So, who wants to share or comment or ask a question? Or there's 2 of you up.
I'll be really short.
Okay.
My name is Carlisle Hashem. I'm here and also in Baltimore.
Speak a little bit louder.
What I'd like to say is that I think it's really important that we create some new words, definitions, whatever you want to say, semantics, about a person who falls into an addictive behavior. Perhaps if doctors would say, internists would say when they take on a new patient, well, if you have cancer in your family, tell us, your brother, your sister, whatever. Do they say, well, do you have addiction in your family? If they had addiction in their family, a conversation would begin to be, in place. At least we know that the parent or the brother or the aunt or the uncle or the whatever, that there's addiction in the family. But then if that child or that patient is not addicted right then, they perhaps have an addictive behavior. But do we need to call it that? No, we don't have to call it that, because that puts a stigma on that person.
Well, you have to take personal responsibility. And you have to also realize that people are limited by it. A lot of times in families, people don't talk about their family history genetically, so people can actually not have a conversation about that. Or they may be orphans and not know it, or they may be an orphan from another country and have absolutely no idea.
Excuses.
No, I'm talking about the reality that some people do not know. Why do we have to wait for doctors to ask that? Why don't people go to doctors and say, here's my family history, if they even know it? But people need to ask their family history, because if a doctor asks you what's your family history, you have to be able to answer that. To answer that question, you got to ask on the other end.
But on the doctor's level, there is not enough resources for them to even learn about what addiction is.
Oh, it's called imagination. It's a cop-out there. Doctors are handing out pills like candy. They know that people are getting addicted, because at the same time, there are people in the medical profession who are handing out some more pills to get them off the addiction. I think it's a cop-out to say that it's...
No, I really think when you get down, I understand where you're coming from, and I'm not negating any of that. But when you get down to, do you have alcoholism in your family? Let's not even use the word addiction. Let's just say, do you have alcoholism in your family? Did any of your family members suffer from alcoholism? And then you know perhaps that child either has a potential of having an addictive behavior, or on the flip side, they're, and I hate using this, but like an Al-Anon person that suffered, because an addiction is, alcoholism is a family-ism. It's not just that one person. Everybody suffers from it. So what I'm saying is that there has to be a much broader spectrum just in definitions of words, so that that child who comes from a parent who has an addictive behavior is probably a very special child. It probably is a very sensitive child, has probably been hurt a lot, but it has maybe is very creative or whatever. There are just so many different things that just saying addiction is not good enough.
How about trauma? Because we've got a lot of people on the planet that are in trauma. You know, and how do people heal? Because when we talk about the wellness with Chris Herron, we didn't talk about how do we get people to heal? How do we get kids to have empathy? How do we get to them to open up?
It's a hard question.
You know, and maybe those are the type of questions that people have to have. But I don't know if the definitions, maybe the definitions do have to change, but at the same time, I think the conversations have to change. Because I think that too much of the time, we pass it over to other people, or we'll blame it on other people, and we'll pass the buck, as opposed to doing it internally.
Yeah, I hear it all the time about the schools. Well, the schools need to. Well, you know what? You want to pay more taxes as a Talbot County citizen? You want to pay more property taxes? Then we'll get more teachers in our schools to teach about drugs. But in the meantime, we as parents and grandparents need to educate our kids. We need to take responsibility for our families.
Yeah.
There's not, and you know, the little survey that I take in my hand raising thing about prescription opiates is 90% of parents and grandparents and kids have no clue about prescription opiates and what they do and what they can lead to. I mean, 90%, 9 out of 10. So, you know, I'm going to call Talbot Goes Purple a success if I give this same talk 6 months from now and 20% raise their hands. I caught two, right, it's prescriptions, and I caught 2 young ladies in a car under 18 years old crushing up Xanax that they got out of a medicine cabinet and snorting it. And Xanax isn't going to lead to heroin, it's going to lead to addiction, but we're not taking responsibility. This stuff wasn't in the medicine cabinets when I was young. When you were young, we didn't have this. These drugs weren't invented. And now we have to understand as parents and grandparents that all those cool things that we have now that treat everything that we can possibly have from a headache in the morning to issues that I have in my bedroom. You know, that all those things in your medicine cabinet, they need to be locked up. You know, we lock up our guns. There's laws to lock up our guns in our society. But there's no, I'm not saying we need a law to lock up your prescriptions, but guns in the United States, all the gun deaths in the United States don't equal how many we're killing with the pills in our medicine cabinets.
That's right.
And we need to understand that because parents don't get it. They don't understand it. So, but thank you for your comment about, I think we do. I think we're changing the conversation in some areas, and there's other areas that we need to, you know, improve and think about, you know, and keep talking about as far as definitions and how we look at addiction. We definitely have to change that, how we look at addiction, because somebody said, you know, I would be one of these kids today. You know, I would be one of these kids that would be struggling because I was a kid that lived on the edge when I was 16, 17, 18 years old. And it wasn't until I got to college and met my beautiful wife that I got on this, you know, I got on a better path. I wasn't trouble, but I was living on the edge. You know, I was doing stupid stuff. So anyway.
Okay, so this is where we're going to do the transition here, unless, madam, you've got a statement you want to make, a short one? Okay, because we're running out of time, because we're going to get to some uplifting music. Yeah.
Well, hopefully this will be a little uplifting. My name is Lynn Gurley. I'm with Eastern Shore Crisis Response. We serve the 9 counties on the Eastern Shore of Maryland and have mobile crisis teams that serve 8 of the 9 counties.
Thank you for what you do.
Yes. Thank you. And I just want to let everybody know that people are getting help. When I first started doing this job 5 years ago, maybe 10% of our calls were related to substance use. The first quarter of this fiscal year, 26% of our calls, the presenting problem was substance use. So, good news, bad news, but people are reaching out for help. And if anybody wants more information about this resource, we link people with services, excuse me, get them into treatment and help anybody with a behavioral health crisis, which includes substance use.
And we use them as police. We call them. We have a lot of mental health issues in our community, people that are really struggling. And we get calls to their houses repeatedly. I mean, sometimes hours in a row, days in a row. And this is the crew we called because we're not specialists. We've been trained in the mobile crisis, our deputies have, and the troopers have, and Easton Police have.
The corrections officers as well.
And corrections officers, so they do a good service. And we're actually been having meetings about how we can further programs in the county where we can refer 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, kids to, or addicted people that come to us and want some help, or people that we arrest, to be able to link them immediately with services. And we're doing that, but we don't have that 24/7, 365. We have that with mobile crisis, and we're looking at new ways that we can use that. So thank you.
Yes. Well, in closing, pardon me, I just first of all want to say thank you to all of you for coming. We're going to have the choir sing as soon as we end this, but I want to say a special thanks to the Avalon crew who has been so kind to Carolyn and Judy and myself. Scott Bachman, Nick Richards, Ryan Finch, Scott Milligan, and of course our own lovely Susie Moore, who runs this place. God bless them for taking care of us. This is, you know, our American Conversations, and it's a hard conversation, but I want to say thank you all for coming. And Joe, again, congratulations to you and Lucy for the success that you have, and Mary for, you know,
it was a great team
giving us your husband and his time away from your family.
We had a huge team. You keep thanking me and Lucy.
It is a huge team. It is a huge team. Those credits that you saw roll after the montage, those are people who have participated, and a lot more people even behind the scenes. But you can see from the montage that it was an opportunity to bring people together. So again, thank you for coming.
Let us look to the Lord. Gracious God, we thank you for this conversation. We thank you for this conversation continuing all across America. Lord, we know that we can defeat this enemy with your power and your grace. So as we look to you, even though the task might be daunting, we ask you to continue to inspire us to reach for higher goals. We thank and praise you. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, family, as the pastor of Asbury United Methodist Church, as well as Scott's United Methodist Church, I want to introduce to you some of the most gifted singers that I've been privileged to be around. The Celebration Choir of Asbury United Methodist Church.
Participate in this song. If you can just stand and hold hands. We're going to ask everybody in Talbot County to reach out and touch somebody's hand.
Reach Thank you, good night, and God bless you all.